What if I told you that one of Hollywood's most respected, disciplined, and universally admired actors walked onto a stage meant to celebrate his own achievements, and instead detonated a verbal grenade that sent shockwaves through the entire room? What if I told you that the moment wasn't a slip, wasn't an accident, and wasn't taken out of context, that the word grifter came out of his mouth with intention, timing, and precision? And what if the person at the crosshairs of that word wasn't a random figure, but Meghan Markle herself? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Let that sink in for a moment. Meghan Markle, publicly roasted. Not on Twitter, not in a gossip column, not by an anonymous insider, but by Michael B. Jordan, a man known for discipline, humility, emotional intelligence, professionalism, and a career free of scandals, drama, or cheap shots. Why would someone like him take that risk? Why would he insert a line like that into a speech at the American Cinematheque Awards 2025, one of the most prestigious, carefully curated, and industry-watched events in Hollywood? Before we even get to what he said, you have to understand this. Rooms like this do not react loudly. They react quietly. In micro-expressions, in quick side glances, in silent flickers of disbelief. And that night, those tiny reactions told the real story. Some faces froze, some eyebrows lifted, some shoulders stiffened, and a few people, the ones who knew more than they were willing to say out loud, exchanged the kind of look that says, finally, someone said it. But why now? Why this moment? Why this event? Why this audience? Let's rewind. It's late 2025, and the entertainment industry is exhausted. Exhausted by carefully curated personas, PR illusions, media manipulation, and strategic victimhood narratives. Hollywood is in a moment where authenticity sells, honesty trends, and the smallest hint of fakery can be a career ender. And in the middle of that delicate environment stands Meghan Markle, a figure who has made reinvention her full-time job, but somehow finds her reinventions falling apart faster each time. Her relationship with Hollywood has shifted. Her alliances have changed. The goodwill she once had has thinned. The questions about her motives have multiplied. And the patience people once had for her storyline, the struggle, the reinvention, the conflict, the escape, has evaporated. So when Michael B. Jordan took the stage, the energy was already fragile. The room was already tense. Not because of Meghan explicitly. She wasn't even there. But because her name had become a cipher for something the industry had been whispering about for years. Something no one powerful enough had dared to say out loud. Until now. As Michael walked up the steps, the applause roared, cameras clicked, lights beamed, and the moment seemed like any other awards ceremony. Predictable, celebratory, formal. But the man walking onto that stage had a presence that made people pay attention before he even opened his mouth. Michael isn't the kind of actor who stirs controversy. He isn't messy. He isn't reckless. When he speaks carefully, intentionally, almost surgically. That's why the roast carried a weight no comedian, no gossip host, no influencer could ever replicate. Because when someone who says nothing negative suddenly decides to break character, you listen. The beginning of his speech was expected. Thank yous, acknowledgments, industry appreciation, until something shifted. A pause, a smirk, a glance at the audience that felt different. A moment where you could hear the room inhale ever so slightly. The people in the front rows leaned in. His tone sharpened, subtly but unmistakably. And then it happened. A line, a joke, a dig, a moment that cut through the formality like a blade. A direct hit at Meghan Markle's reputation as someone who, according to Michael, manipulates narratives, exploits opportunities, twists circumstances to her favor, and leaves others to clean up the mess. The word grifter didn't slip. It landed. And the room felt it. Now pause here for a second and ask yourself, why would Michael B. Jordan, of all people, bring her up during one of the most important speeches of his career? What did he know? What had he seen? What had he been told? What conversations happened behind closed doors that led him to break the unspoken Hollywood code of silence? Because make no mistake, Hollywood does have a code. A code that says, you do not call out other celebrities publicly. You especially do not do it during a career-defining moment. And you definitely do not use a word as sharp, loaded, and reputation-shattering as grifter without a reason. But Michael had a reason. A reason that traces back to years of industry whispers, studio deals, private interactions, stories passed quietly from one executive to another, and a certain backstage conversation that happened earlier that night, just minutes before he took the stage. We'll get there. But first, the atmosphere. Let's paint that room, because this moment makes no sense unless you understand the emotional temperature before the detonation. The Beverly Hilton ballroom was glowing, golden lighting, immaculate white tablecloths, shimmering glassware, perfectly arranged floral centerpieces. The sound of laughter mixed with the clinking of champagne flutes. Celebrities exchanging warm hugs, producers greeting each other, directors whispering about upcoming projects. The kind of evening where everyone pretends everything is fine, everyone is thriving, and everyone is part of the same immaculate Hollywood machine. But beneath that glossy surface, tension simmered. Because just days before the event, a wave of insider rumors began circulating. Whispers of a growing divide between Hollywood elites and the Sussex camp. Whispers that certain actors were distancing themselves. Whispers that studios were hesitant. Whispers that certain deals had quietly fallen apart. People came into that ballroom with opinions they would never publicly admit, thoughts they kept to themselves. And when Michael took the stage, something in the room shifted, as if every unspoken thought found itself suddenly on the edge of becoming real. The crowd expected a heartfelt speech, and they got one. But they also got something else, a moment of brutal honesty delivered with charisma, humor, and razor-sharp timing. Now, ask yourself this. How does a room of world-class actors react when someone finally says the thing everyone has been thinking? How does a space full of PR-trained, media-polished celebrities respond when the script goes off-book? They didn't laugh loudly. They didn't shout. They didn't cheer. Instead, the reaction was honest in the quietest possible way. Widened eyes, shifting posture, smothered laughs, sharp inhales, tightly crossed arms, and those infamous Hollywood half-smiles that say, "This is going to be a story tomorrow." The cutaway shots on the broadcast told even more. A certain actress whose history with Meghan is complicated. A producer who once worked with her. A studio head with a politely strained expression. Each reaction was its own mini-story, its own confession. The question is, what pushed Michael to do this? Because this wasn't a roast segment of a comedy show. This wasn't a scripted bit. This wasn't part of the event program. This was intentional. And intention always has a trigger. To find that trigger, you have to understand the tension that had been building around Meghan for years, not just publicly, but internally within the industry. Talent managers, publicists, assistants, producers, directors, the people who deal with stars behind the scenes, had quietly grown frustrated. They talked about unpredictability, narrative manipulation, inconsistency, a mismatch between persona and action. And here's the contradiction. Meghan's public image is built on empowerment, authenticity, kindness, and storytelling. But many insiders had stories that suggested the opposite. And contradictions like that don't stay buried forever. Michael was aware of some of them. Maybe more than he expected. Maybe more than he wanted to be. And that brings us to the second question. Why now? Why, in late 2025, did the dam finally break? Because Hollywood had reached its peak with curated victimhood narratives. The industry was shifting toward transparency, toward bluntness, toward calling people out, gently, subtly, but undeniably. And Michael was the last person anyone expected to lead that charge. So when he did, the shock was nuclear. The moment he said the line, a dozen people at different tables froze. A few tried to smile it off, but the stiffness in their necks gave them away. A cluster of executives exchanged glances like they had just witnessed something historic. Younger actors, who had no ties to Meghan, laughed with the kind of relief you see when someone finally breaks an unspoken rule everyone secretly hated. And somewhere in a penthouse hundreds of miles away, Meghan's team scrambled. Because when a man with Michael's reputation labels you a grifter, even indirectly, it sticks. The introduction isn't about convincing you that the roast happened. It's about showing you the emotional landscape, the tension, the contradictions, the stakes. It's about making you feel the weight of the moment so vividly that when we walk into Chapter 1, you'll understand exactly why the entire industry reacted like it did. We're about to dive into every detail. The backstage moment that set this all in motion, the celebrity reactions that the cameras caught, the origins of Michael's frustration, the industry gossip that bubbled beneath the event, and the final line he said that left the room stunned. But before we get there, you need to hold on to this one truth. This wasn't random. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't impulsive. Michael B. Jordan doesn't speak without purpose. And on that night, his purpose wasn't to entertain. It was to expose something. And next, we're going to peel back the curtain on what led up to that explosive moment, starting with the first sign that something felt different long before Michael even stepped onto the stage. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever walked into a room and felt something you couldn't explain, like the energy had shifted just a few degrees off-center, as if the air itself was holding its breath? That's exactly what was happening inside the Beverly Hilton the moment the American Cinematheque Awards 2025 began. The ceremony hadn't even started, but the tension was already humming like low-voltage electricity beneath the gold-draped elegance of the ballroom. And the strangest part? No one could point to a single visible reason why. It wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. It wasn't dramatic. And yet every subtle detail, every sideways glance, every too-long pause, every quiet whisper between guests hinted that something was coming. The guests knew it, even if they didn't admit it. The organizers felt it, even if they pretended otherwise. And Michael B. Jordan, somewhere backstage adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit, had absolutely no idea that he was about to ignite the tension the room had been silently swallowing for months. Let's rewind to the beginning of the evening. The carpets had just been vacuumed to perfection. The tables were lined with shimmering glassware that sparkled under the overhead lighting like tiny constellations. Celebrities floated from one group to another, exchanging hugs, snapping photos, laughing in that polite Hollywood way where the smile is big but the meaning is shallow. Assistants hovered at the edges of clusters like satellites, scanning the room, checking schedules, coordinating movements. Everything looked flawless, at least on the surface. But here's the thing about Hollywood events. The surface is always a disguise. Underneath the glitz lies an ecosystem built on hierarchy, rivalry, unspoken alliances, grudges, and the kind of passive-aggressive politics that would make a diplomat sweat. And when a celebrity with a turbulent reputation, even if they're not physically present, becomes the unspoken center of that energy, the atmosphere shifts. So let me ask you directly. Have you ever witnessed a room full of people pretending nothing is wrong, even when every silent cue screams otherwise? That was the ballroom. One of the first signs of that shift came from the entrance walkway, a place that usually bursts with friendly greetings and warm exchanges. But tonight, some greetings felt tense. You could see it in the body language. Hugs held a beat too long, as if they were trying to reassure themselves that everything was fine. Some smiles were stiff. Some conversations ended quickly, punctuated by nervous glances toward the stage. Why? Because someone had mentioned Meghan Markle. Not loudly, not publicly, just quietly enough that the people standing nearby heard it, froze for half a second, and then tried to move on. That's all it took. Her name had become an emotional trigger in Hollywood spaces, a word that could tighten a jaw, stiffen a posture, or spark a quick exchange of, let's not get into that right now looks. Even when she wasn't there, she was everywhere, floating through conversations like an unresolved storyline. Now picture this. Just minutes into arrivals, an actress who once worked on a project with Meghan leaned toward a friend and whispered something. The friend's eyebrows lifted. Her mouth tightened, and the two of them shared a micro-expression, half amusement, half frustration, that said more than any words could. The kind of look that hinted at stories, memories, and perhaps even regrets. Then it happened again with someone else. Another whisper, another reaction, and suddenly the tension wasn't imagined, it was undeniable. But why tonight? Why this event? Why this timing? Because powerful people were in the room. Important people. People who had history. People who had opinions. People who had been burned. And people who had been waiting, quietly, strategically. For the moment the tide finally turned. Michael B. Jordan wasn't even in the ballroom yet, and the air was already shifting in his direction. Let's follow the camera, metaphorically. Imagine it gliding across the room, catching snippets of conversations, capturing the tiny details that reveal a bigger truth. There's a producer adjusting his cufflinks, glancing at a table list with concern. There's an actor scrolling through his phone, smirking at a message that probably wasn't meant to be funny. There are publicists whispering instructions. There's a studio head looking unusually tense. These are the people who know things. These are the people who feel momentum before it happens. And tonight, something was circling like a storm. As guests took their seats, the emotional undercurrent only intensified. The seating arrangement, a silent communication tool in Hollywood, told its own story. Certain celebrities were placed near industry heavyweights. Some were moved last minute. A few were shifted entirely off the prime tables. That doesn't happen by accident. Imagine being in a room where every empty chair, every last-minute adjustment, every swapped name tag feels like it carries coded meaning. People noticed. They always notice. And this is where contradiction becomes fascinating. The more glamorous the event, the more unstable the emotional foundation. The more polished the decor, the more electrified the tension. The more cameras flash, the more people fear slipping. Tonight's contradiction was this. The ceremony wanted peace, but the room was vibrating with pressure. Now let's zoom in on Michael B. Jordan for a moment. Somewhere backstage, he was preparing for his big moment, the moment the event was built around. His award, his speech, his legacy. He wasn't thinking about tension. He wasn't thinking about the atmosphere in the room. He wasn't thinking about Meghan Markle. Not yet. But someone else had already brought her up. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Someone whose comment floated into the air and found its way to ears that understood its significance. And here's where it gets interesting. The whispers weren't negative. They weren't insults. They weren't blatant. They were cautious, but loaded. The kind of whispers that hint at past interactions, unmet expectations, complicated experiences. The kind that only people who have worked with someone can deliver sincerely. And the more those whispers spread, the more the room tensed. The more the room tensed, the more the stage felt like it was holding a secret. And the more the stage held that secret, the more it felt like the night was building towards something unexpected. Let's pause for a moment. Think about this. Have you ever witnessed a situation where everyone feels something coming, but no one knows exactly what? Where anticipation builds with no clear direction. That was the room minutes before Michael's major moment. The presenters took the stage. The audience applauded. Everything looked normal. But the energy was anything but normal. You could feel it in the air. The way people sat up straighter, leaned in more, whispered faster, scanned the room more carefully. It was like watching a fuse slowly burning toward a line of fireworks. You know something explosive is coming, but you don't know which one will ignite first. And then, the first spark appeared. A producer from a major studio walked to a colleague's table and muttered a quick line while pretending to adjust something on his suit. That colleague's expression shifted instantly. He didn't laugh. He didn't smile. He looked relieved, as if he had been carrying a weight and someone had just confirmed he wasn't imagining it. What was that line? We'll get there. Because the truth is, multiple sparks had already been lit, subtle ones, quiet ones, private ones. And every spark was drifting toward the same center point, Michael B. Jordan's speech. But before that moment came, something else took place, something small, but telling. An actress sitting at the front table received a text, and her reaction was impossible to miss. Her eyes widened. Her lips parted. Her shoulders tensed. She leaned toward the friend next to her and whispered something, and the friend responded with a slow, stunned shake of the head. Want to guess what that text was about? Think carefully. Think logically. Think about where this story is heading. Because that text contained something that would frame the entire evening. Something that would set off emotional dominoes. Something that would make Michael's later comment hit even harder. Meanwhile, more guests filtered to their seats. More glances were exchanged. More tiny details accumulated into an unmistakable conclusion. The night was not going to go smoothly. The contradictions were everywhere. The smiles were wide, but the tension was sharp. The applause was loud, but the unease was louder. People acted calm, but their jittery energy betrayed them. Why? Because somehow, without being present, Meghan Markle was already influencing the night. And the room was waiting for something. They didn't know what. They just knew it was coming. And they were right. Because in just a few minutes, the lights would dim, the music would swell, and Michael B. Jordan would step onto the stage, unknowingly stepping into the emotional storm that had been brewing all evening. But before he took that step, something happened backstage that changed the tone of everything. Something he heard. Something someone told him. Something that made him smirk. Something that made him pause. Something that shifted his speech, not dramatically, but just enough to send a shockwave through the ballroom. But what exactly did he hear? And who said it? And why did it matter so much? That's the moment we're diving into next. And trust me, what came next would change everything, and absolutely no one saw it coming. Have you ever looked at something so simple, so ordinary, so seemingly harmless, and realized it was actually hiding a secret? That's exactly what the seating chart at the American Cinematheque Awards 2025 was doing. Sitting innocently at the entrance, printed on thick ivory cardstock, illuminated by soft golden lighting, and quietly causing a chain reaction across the room. Because in Hollywood, seating charts aren't just logistics. They're power. They're politics. They're pressure points. They're messages. And on this particular night, the message was loud enough for anyone paying attention to hear. But let's start with the mini-hook. Why did the energy shift so dramatically the second the seating chart came into play? Because people started realizing that someone had been moved. Someone else had been removed. And someone had been elevated. These aren't coincidences. Seating arrangements at events like this are curated with the precision of a chessboard. Nothing is random. Every chair has a meaning. Every table has a hierarchy. Every cluster of celebrities is engineered to create or avoid certain conversations. So let me ask you, have you ever watched a room full of powerful people try to hide their reactions and fail? Because that's exactly what happened the moment guests reached the chart. Let's walk through the scene. A cluster of attendees approached the display, smiling politely as an organizer gestured them forward. "Find your table, please," she said, her voice sweet and controlled. And then, the first double take. An actor from a major streaming giant stared at the chart with eyebrows raised. He wasn't confused. He wasn't lost. He was surprised. Why? Because he had been moved 3 tables back from where he expected to be placed. A small detail? Maybe. But in Hollywood, small details scream. Then came the second shift. A famous director, clearly expecting a prime seat near the stage, found himself placed not exactly at the edge of the room, but close enough that it stung. His smile tightened. His expression froze. His assistant, standing behind him, did the thing assistants do when something goes wrong. She made a note. But here's the twist. Not all the changes were downgrades. Because the real shock came when people noticed who had been moved into the front cluster. A young actress. Not an A-lister. Not a long-time Hollywood icon. Not someone with blockbuster credentials. But someone who, just 2 years earlier, had posted a cryptic message online hinting at a rocky experience with Meghan Markle. Coincidence? You tell me. Her placement wasn't neutral. It was strategic. Front table. Center angle. Perfect camera access. Perfect visibility. People noticed. And the whispers began. Why is she up there? When did she get bumped up? Who approved that change? What does she have to do with this event? Is this because of you know who? You know who? The name no one wanted to say out loud. The name that already hung over the room like humidity. Meghan. Now, let me paint the picture. As these reactions rippled through the room, the facial expressions told the real story. A veteran producer raised his eyebrows in disbelief. A publicist's head snapped toward the chart with laser focus. 2 actresses shared a knowing glance. One full of curiosity, the other laced with the kind of caution you use when you realize something bigger is unfolding. And then, the most telling detail of all, a small rectangular card taped to the corner of the chart. Revised seating. Final update. Printed just hours before the event. Meaning someone fought for changes. Someone negotiated. Someone insisted. And Hollywood insiders are trained to read between the lines. This wasn't just about table placement. This was a signal. Pressure had been applied. But from whom? And why? Now, let's take a step deeper, because this is where things get interesting. The actress who had been moved forward, let's call her Ellie for narrative clarity, wasn't just bumped up for aesthetics. She had been placed next to someone very significant. A studio executive who had once been approached by Meghan Markle for a development deal. A deal that fell apart. A deal whose internal notes had circulated quietly through the industry. A deal that left behind questions. So, think about it for a second. Ellie, who had spoken privately about her uncomfortable Meghan encounter, suddenly seated next to a studio executive who had history with Meghan too. That's like placing 2 landmines next to each other and hoping no one steps in the wrong direction. Coincidence? Or was someone directing the emotional storyline of the night before it even began? Hollywood doesn't do coincidences. Now, let's widen the lens. Across the room, a director who once publicly praised Meghan was moved further from the stage. A producer who had clashed with her behind closed doors, upgraded. A journalist known for sharp commentary, perfect sight line to the podium. A PR strategist with ties to Meghan, tucked near the back. It was like watching a political map being redrawn. And speaking of politics, the tension at the seating chart was palpable. People acted calm, but their eyes betrayed curiosity. Their shoulders stayed relaxed, but their hands fidgeted with the edges of their table numbers. Their feet shifted. Their smiles flickered. Celebrities who usually floated through events with unshakable confidence suddenly looked thoughtful. Why? Because the seating chart hinted at one truth. Someone was preparing for a moment. Someone anticipated reactions, anticipated fallout, anticipated impact, and they didn't want certain people too close to each other when it hit. Now let's ask the most important question. Did Michael B. Jordan know about these seating changes? Not yet, but the people around him did. The people who had access to backstage. The people who whispered. Because the seating chart wasn't just rearranged, it was weaponized. It was the first domino in a chain reaction designed to guide the room's emotional responses. And here's the thing about Hollywood. Emotional manipulation isn't a scandal. It's an art, a skill, a strategy. As guests took their seats, the murmurs grew louder. Chairs scraped softly. Wine glasses clinked. Program booklets shuffled. But each tiny movement was part of a larger rhythm. Awareness sharpening. Attention narrowing. Expectation rising. Every shift in placement changed the perspective of someone influential. Every unexpected pairing created new tensions. Every moved seat hinted that something, or someone, was coming. And then came the moment that sealed it. A celebrity stylist, walking past the chart with her assistant, whispered under her breath, "Oh, they did this because of Meghan." Her assistant's eyes widened. She nodded. They kept walking. But that one whisper confirmed what many were already starting to piece together. The room had been arranged with Meghan Markle in mind. Not for her appearance, not for her arrival, but for the impact of her absence. And that's where things snap into focus. Because when an entire event is structured around the emotional gravity of someone who isn't there, it means one thing. People are waiting for something to break, waiting for someone to say something, waiting for a story to shift, waiting for the tension to snap. And Michael B. Jordan, backstage, adjusting his jacket, taking a quiet breath before stepping into the spotlight, had no idea the room had already been primed. He was walking into a space arranged like a chessboard. And someone had just moved the pieces into attack formation. But who arranged this setup? Whose decision was it to make these last-minute seating changes? And what did they know? What were they expecting? And how did it connect to the explosive moment we're heading toward? Because the truth is, the seating chart wasn't the climax. It was the warning, the foreshadowing, the signal. The room hadn't seen anything yet. And the moment Michael learned what was happening, the moment someone backstage pulled him aside and whispered something that made his lips curl into a smirk, everything shifted. But what exactly did he hear? And why did it change the way he delivered his speech? We're going there next. And trust me, what happened backstage was far bigger than anyone realized, and it set the stage for the roast heard around the room. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever witnessed a moment so small, so seemingly insignificant, that you only realize later it was the spark that lit the fuse? A moment that felt casual on the surface, but beneath it pulsed with all the tension, history, and unspoken truth that the room had been trying to suppress. Because that's exactly what happened backstage minutes before Michael B. Jordan walked on stage to deliver the speech that would shake the entire American Cinematheque Awards. And it all started with a whisper. Not a dramatic confrontation. Not a heated argument. Not a confrontation or meltdown or scene. Just a whisper, quiet, controlled, intentional, but sharp enough to slice through the perfectly curated atmosphere of the night. Let's rewind to the exact moment before the event broke into applause and camera flashes. Michael was backstage, standing near a black velvet curtain, adjusting the buttons on his jacket. He looked calm, focused. The picture of poised confidence. It was one of those polished Hollywood moments. the star of the night taking deep breaths, shutting out noise, preparing to step into the spotlight. But backstage energy has its own rhythm, one that's often far more honest than the smiling illusions happening out in the ballroom. Backstage, you get real reactions, real conversations, real emotions, real fear. No cameras, or so people think, means no need to filter. Which is why, in that supposedly safe bubble, truth has a funny way of slipping out. Michael was reviewing his remarks with a coordinator, flipping through a few printed pages, when an actress, someone he'd worked with before, someone he respected, stepped toward him. She looked around first, the way someone does when they know what they're about to say is not meant for public ears. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't frantic. But there was something in her eyes. A kind of urgency mixed with simmering frustration. It was the kind of expression people wear when they're tired of pretending. She leaned in just slightly, lowered her voice, and said a line that instantly rewired the energy of the night. She did it again, you know. Michael turned. Did what again? A tiny pause, a slow exhale, a look that carried months, maybe years, of Hollywood whispers. She pulled one of her stunts. There it was. Not said loudly, not said dramatically, but said with enough weight that Michael's expression shifted, not shocked, but knowing. That's when it became clear he had heard things before. You could see it in the subtle narrowing of his eyes, the slight tightening of his jaw, the tiny smirk at the corner of his mouth. The actress noticed it too, and she continued. She called the producers. Again, tried to reshuffle something, tried to reposition herself in the coverage. And then, when it didn't work, she sent someone else to handle it. You know the pattern. Michael inhaled. A deep, silent inhale. Because the truth is, yes, he did know the pattern. Everyone did. Everyone in Hollywood had a Meghan story, some innocuous, some frustrating, some chaotic, but all pointing toward a common thread: manipulation. This actress wasn't gossiping. She wasn't spreading a rumor. She was stating a fact too many people had privately confirmed. She glanced around again, then added. And she tried to get placed in the highlight reel. The team shut it down, so she threw a fit behind the scenes. Not directly, always through someone else. Always through layers. You know how she moves. Michael said nothing. He didn't need to. The silence said everything. And then she dropped the line. The line that made Michael's eyebrows lift ever so slightly. The line that made him tilt his head. The line that would later echo in his mind as he stepped onto the stage. She's been telling people she was supposed to be honored tonight. Michael blinked. Not confused, stunned. Because that was a lie so bold, so bizarre, so stunningly disconnected from reality, that even someone as composed as Michael had to process it. She said that, he asked quietly. The actress nodded, her expression tightening like someone holding back an eye roll. And she even suggested that the organizers replaced her with you. Let that sink in. Replaced her. With Michael B. Jordan. A global superstar. A critically acclaimed actor. A man whose filmography and influence speak for themselves. A man whose work ethic is legendary. And yet Meghan, according to this actress, was pushing a narrative that she had been the intended honoree, and that Michael was some kind of stand-in. This wasn't just a stretch. It wasn't just exaggeration. It wasn't even wishful thinking. It was delusion. A delusion with a purpose. Michael didn't laugh. He didn't get angry. He didn't react dramatically. He just smirked. A small, tight-lipped smirk. The kind you give when someone says something so outlandish it forces you into silence because your brain can't process it yet. But that smirk carried weight. He wasn't amused. He wasn't pleased. He wasn't flattered by the comparison. He was irritated. Because Hollywood has rules, even if they're unspoken. And one of the biggest rules is, you don't disrespect the hierarchy by rewriting other people's achievements. Michael earned his honor. He worked for it. He built his reputation brick by brick. No shortcuts, no schemes, no rebranding marathons, just discipline. So to hear that someone, especially someone known for bending narratives, was twisting his moment into hers, that struck a nerve. And the actress wasn't done. She placed her hand on his arm and leaned in slightly closer, her tone shifting into something more serious. People are tired, Michael. Really tired. Nobody wants to say it publicly because of the noise it creates. But privately, everyone knows. Everyone feels it. Everyone's annoyed. Michael looked at her. Slowly, thoughtfully, curiously. You're saying they expect me to say something? She shrugged. But it wasn't a casual shrug. It was a loaded one. Not expect. Just wouldn't be surprised. Not tonight. Not after that seating chart. He exhaled, a breath heavy enough to reveal that her comment had sunk in. And that's when another figure appeared. A producer, someone high-ranking, someone who had been part of the event planning committee. He stepped closer, greeted Michael with a handshake, and then, without even realizing the actress had already said something, added fuel to the fire. By the way, Michael, you didn't hear this from me, but Meghan's team tried to get her mentioned during the opening montage. Michael froze. Mentioned? What? The producer lowered his voice. She pitched herself as a representative of modern Hollywood humanitarianism. We declined. Of course they declined. It wasn't her night. She wasn't involved. She had no connection to the event. It made no sense. But she still tried. And here's where the emotional twist sharpens. The producer wasn't annoyed. He was embarrassed. Embarrassed that someone had tried to hijack the event's narrative. Embarrassed that he had to be the one to shut it down. Embarrassed that this had become normal. He added one more line, a line that sealed the entire mood backstage. She acts like any spotlight is her spotlight. That hit Michael harder than anything else said that night. Because in one sentence, the producers summarized years of frustration. And that's when the shift happened, not externally, but internally, deep in Michael's expression. His posture straightened just slightly. His breathing changed. His energy hardened. The smirk softened into something much more controlled. You could almost see the wheels in his mind turning. He wasn't planning a roast. He wasn't planning a hit. He wasn't planning revenge. But he was processing, evaluating, reconsidering. And that's when the actress added the final drop. The drop that made the entire backstage moment explode internally. She's calling you a PR move, Michael. He blinked. Slowly. What? She said the organization picked you because you're safe. That you don't stir controversy. That you're predictable. That you're the safe, easy choice. Safe. Predictable. Easy. The implication was obvious. That Michael wasn't honored for talent, but because he wouldn't upstage others. A deeply insulting narrative. A deeply disrespectful angle. A deeply revealing window into how Meghan allegedly saw him. And that was it. The exact moment something snapped inside him. Quietly, calmly, but decisively. He didn't shout. He didn't react dramatically. He simply inhaled, exhaled, and said, "Interesting. Interesting." That's the word people use when they're done tolerating something. It's the word people use when they're preparing to respond. It's the word people use when they've reached the emotional threshold where silence no longer feels like strength. And as Michael walked toward the stage entrance, the producer called after him, "Break a leg up there." Michael didn't turn around. He didn't need to, because something in his expression had changed. The calm, collected, disciplined leading man was still there, but something sharper had awakened underneath. Something bolder. Something more willing to say what others wouldn't. He adjusted his collar, rolled his shoulders, stepped forward as the lights shifted. And in that final moment before the curtain parted, Michael whispered something under his breath, a quiet, almost amused remark that no microphone caught. "So I'm safe, huh?" That wasn't anger. That was intention. The kind of intention that transforms a speech into a cultural moment. The kind of intention that turns a whisper into a headline. The kind of intention that leads to a roast that shakes an entire industry. And as he took those last few steps toward the podium, one thing became painfully clear. Michael wasn't going to stick to the script. But what he said first, before the roast, before the gasp, before the word grifter echoed across the room, is what set the stage for everything that followed. And we're going there next. But what came next would change everything. And absolutely no one saw it coming. Here's a question that cuts right to the bone. How does someone go from being one of the most talked about, globally recognized figures in entertainment to becoming a name whispered with caution, frustration, and exhaustion behind closed Hollywood doors? How does someone ignite so much initial goodwill, so much curiosity, so much fascination, only for that energy to cool into something far more complicated? And more importantly, why was the American Cinematheque Awards 2025 the moment when that entire undercurrent finally boiled over? Because before Michael B. Jordan ever touched that podium, before he ever dropped a line that sent shockwaves through the ballroom, before he ever smirked at the crowd like someone who knew exactly what he was doing, Hollywood's Meghan Markle problem had already been simmering for years. Let's get into it. Ask any insider. Not the publicists, not the curated online fan accounts, but the people who actually navigate deals, negotiate contracts, and handle celebrities during crisis mode. And they'll all tell you the same thing. Hollywood remembers everything. Every broken promise. Every deflection. Every inconsistency. Every pattern. And Meghan's patterns? They had been building a reputation long before Michael's roast ever occurred. But what exactly is this problem, and why had it become such a sensitive subject? It comes down to a contradiction, the kind that Hollywood absolutely cannot stand. Because Meghan built her brand on authenticity, while insiders privately complained of manipulation. She branded herself as empowering, while people behind the scenes whispered about being used. She championed integrity, while others described her as calculating. She presented herself as a storyteller, while entire teams quietly claimed she was rewriting narratives as she went. Contradictions like this become dangerous currency in Hollywood, not because people hate contradictions, but because contradictions destroy trust. And trust is the one commodity more precious than fame. So let me ask you directly, what happens when a public persona and private behavior drift too far apart? People stop buying the story. And that's exactly what was happening. Let's rewind to the moment Meghan first re-entered Hollywood's orbit after leaving the royal family. Her PR machine was spinning at full force. Meetings, pitch decks, strategic partnerships, inspirational messaging, big promises, bigger declarations about redefining Hollywood. But the reality behind the scenes? It wasn't quite matching the glossy exterior. Here's what insiders described over and over. Meetings scheduled, then canceled. Projects pitched, then overhyped. Deals discussed, then quietly dissolved. Expectations raised, then unmet. Allies cultivated, then mysteriously alienated. Teams hired, then cycled out. Productions planned, then abandoned. Every time someone thought they understood her trajectory, it shifted. Every time someone tried to help her, they felt overshadowed. Every time someone supported her, they felt unappreciated. One studio executive put it bluntly, off the record, of course. She's the only actress whose script changes every week, and I don't mean the project script. I mean the narrative script. Now, think about the psychology of a room full of powerful people who have deal flow on the brain, who depend on consistency, reliability, and clarity. These are people accustomed to navigating complex personalities, but what they cannot tolerate is unpredictability that costs time, money, or reputation. And Meghan? She was unpredictable. The kind of unpredictable that drains investors. The kind that makes directors nervous. The kind that frustrates producers. The kind that scares PR teams. The kind that forces executives to say the one thing they hate saying. Let's wait and see how this plays out. But here's the emotional twist, and it's important. Hollywood didn't turn on Meghan overnight. No one wanted to dislike her. No one wanted tension. No one wanted friction. In fact, when she returned to Hollywood, many people genuinely wished her well. They respected her hustle. They loved her charisma. They admired her message. They saw potential, and Hollywood is addicted to potential. But potential becomes a problem when it isn't managed properly. And that's where Meghan's problem begins to crystallize. She didn't mismanage opportunities. She mismanaged expectations. She presented herself as the next big visionary, the next big revolutionary, the next big voice, but her actions didn't align with that positioning. And in an industry where alignment is everything, misalignment becomes a silent killer. Let's go deeper. There were projects she pitched that never got past the concept phase. Series ideas that fizzled out. A podcast partnership that ended dramatically. A docu-series that underperformed. A philanthropic initiative that stalled. A brand collaboration that never materialized. Each one added a tiny layer of frustration to an already sensitive ecosystem. And you know what Hollywood hates more than anything? Being embarrassed. Meghan embarrassed people, not intentionally, but through inconsistency. Through half-finished ideas. Through overpromising and underdelivering. Through inserting herself into narratives she wasn't invited into. Through trying to center spotlight around herself even when it didn't belong to her. Sound familiar? Because that's exactly why the backstage whisper, "She thinks she was supposed to be honored tonight," hit Michael so hard. He didn't hear it as gossip. He heard it as confirmation. Confirmation of something people had been quietly observing for years. Meghan's habit of reframing situations to protect or elevate her own narrative, even when the facts didn't match. And let's be honest, Hollywood forgives drama. Hollywood forgives arrogance. Hollywood forgives ego. Hollywood forgives ambition. But what Hollywood does not forgive is repeatedly shifting blame, dismissing accountability, or making others look foolish. That's when people start talking. Not publicly, not on record, but privately, in circles, in whispers, in the very backstage corridors where Michael stood minutes before his speech. And now, the retention twist, the emotional hook. Because the reason Michael's roast hit so hard wasn't just because of what he said. It was because of who said it. Michael B. Jordan doesn't do cheap shots. He doesn't sling insults. He doesn't punch down. He doesn't stir drama. So if someone like him says something like that, it means he's not the only one feeling it. It means the sentiment is widespread. It means he's voicing what many have been too afraid to put into words. Let me ask you again. When the most disciplined man in the room decides to speak up, what does that say about the situation? It says the problem is bigger than one actress. It says the frustration is deeper than one incident. It says the tipping point has been reached. And tonight, on that stage, Michael became the first major figure to publicly acknowledge Hollywood's Meghan Markle problem. But here's the irony, the surprising twist that makes this story even more dramatic. Michael didn't enter the night intending to roast anyone. He didn't plan a call-out. He didn't walk backstage thinking, "Tonight I'm going to make a statement." The statement found him. The whispers, the shifts in seating, the backstage confessions, the repeated stories, the direct comparison between him and her, the suggestion that she was overshadowed, the implication that his success was tied to her narrative. That's the moment he realized the truth. Hollywood wasn't just tired of Meghan. Hollywood was embarrassed by her. Hollywood wanted someone to break the silence. He didn't have to name her. He didn't have to direct the line. He didn't have to explain the subtext. The room already knew. And when he dropped the word that would ricochet across social media, when he made that single, razor-sharp remark, it wasn't random. It was the culmination of everything Hollywood had been suppressing. But here's what makes this even more explosive. Michael didn't only drop one line. He dropped a second one. Sharper, heavier, even more stunning. And that's what sent the entire ballroom into a silent, electrified chaos. And that's where we're heading next. Because Michael's roast didn't begin with the word everyone remembers. It began with a twist, a setup, a moment of comedic timing so unexpected that the audience didn't even know what hit them until it was too late. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Here's a question that should linger in your mind as we step deeper into this story. What does it take for a man with a spotless reputation, a man respected not just for his work, but for his character, to finally say the thing that everyone else has been whispering? What pushes someone known for discipline, humility, and quiet leadership to break the Hollywood code and drop a line that instantly becomes the most replayed moment of the entire night? Because before you can understand the impact of Michael B. Jordan's roast, you need to understand the kind of man he is and why the moment hit with the force of an emotional earthquake. Let's dig into the psychology, the history, and the irony behind the roast that nobody expected. Michael B. Jordan is not a chaotic celebrity. He's not unpredictable. He's not sloppy in his choices. He doesn't pick fights. He doesn't throw shade. He doesn't burn bridges. And he doesn't, ever, get caught in a PR disaster. In fact, he might be one of the few modern actors who has managed to climb the Hollywood ladder without leaving a trail of damaged relationships behind him. Think about that for a second. In an industry where careers get tangled in scandals, rivalries, and drama every other week, Michael somehow stood above the noise. Every director who worked with him praised him. Every co-star described him as grounded, focused, kind, and shockingly normal for a megastar. So ask yourself this. What does it take for someone like that to publicly aim a jab with surgical precision? It takes provocation. It takes fatigue. It takes witnessing patterns behind the scenes that he can no longer ignore. And it takes hearing one too many whispers that turned into stories that turned into undeniable truths. The truth is, Michael is the anti-drama actor. Early in his career, before the world came to know him through roles in Creed, Black Panther, and dozens of critically acclaimed projects, his mentors drilled something into him. Professionalism is your armor. Your behavior matters more than your fame. Your decisions become your reputation. And once your name is damaged, you may never get it back. He took that seriously, painstakingly seriously. On set, he's known for arriving early, leaving late, and treating everyone, from lead stars to background extras, with respect. He studies. He prepares. He listens. He absorbs. He avoids ego wars. He doesn't need to dominate the room to be the most powerful person in it. His silence holds weight. His calmness commands attention. His presence steadies people. And ironically, that's the exact personality type Hollywood tries to protect, because industry people love someone who can deliver results without generating chaos. Michael is the dream collaborator, which makes this even more shocking. He doesn't speak out unless something crosses a boundary. And Meghan Markle, intentionally or not, crossed several. Not publicly, not through headlines, but through the behind-the-scenes maneuvers that had been frustrating Hollywood for months. Because here's the twist. Michael wasn't reacting to just one rumor. Not one incident. Not one flawed interaction. He was reacting to a pattern multiple people had confirmed. A pattern that had begun to irritate even the calmest personalities in the business. Let's dive deeper into this pattern. Not because we need to focus on Meghan, but because understanding the scenario explains why Michael, a man who never loses composure, suddenly reached his limit. Hollywood insiders had started describing a repeated cycle, privately, discreetly, often while shaking their heads. Meghan would enter a space with a certain narrative. She would present herself as a visionary or a collaborator. She would make promises, big, bright, impressive promises. Then things would shift. Expectations weren't met. Stories changed. Blame moved around. Suddenly the narrative was different from what people experienced. And those people? They felt used. Not harmed. Not destroyed. Not betrayed. Just used. And that feeling simmered. It simmered in writers' rooms. It simmered in private meetings. It simmered in studio discussions. It simmered during negotiations. And on the night of the awards, it simmered in the seating chart. This is important because Michael is the exact opposite type of person. He doesn't make promises he can't keep. He doesn't manipulate narratives. He doesn't push other people aside to get into the spotlight. He doesn't reshape events to make himself look bigger. He doesn't need to. His work speaks for him. His discipline speaks for him. His integrity speaks for him. So imagine the emotional friction when someone tries to piggyback on his moment. Imagine the irritation when he hears whispers that someone is claiming they were supposed to be honored instead of him. Imagine the subtle insult hidden within the phrase, Michael is the safe choice. Safe. Think about that word. Safe can mean respectable. Safe can mean reliable. Safe can mean stable. But safe can also imply predictable, replaceable, unexciting. Michael is many things. Boring is not one of them. His career is built on taking risks. He's produced projects that studios initially doubted. He has fought for representation, authenticity, and harder roles. He transformed physically and emotionally for multiple characters. He directs. He invests. He innovates. There is nothing safe about a man who challenges himself in every creative venture. And that's why the backstage comments stung. Not because he cared about Meghan, but because the insinuation dismissed the work he fought tooth and nail to build. But here's the emotional center of this chapter. Michael wasn't just irritated. He was tired, not personally, but on behalf of the hundreds of people who had confided their frustrations to him over the years. People who told him stories like, she charmed everyone at the first meeting, but after that it was chaos. She wanted her name first in the credits even though she wasn't the lead. She would say one thing publicly and do something different privately. She expected exceptions that no one else got. Her narrative changed constantly. She acted like every project was about her. Multiply that by dozens of insiders. Multiply it again by years of tension. You reach a boiling point. And Hollywood isn't a town that confronts problems head-on. It avoids. It deflects. It smiles politely. Until someone finally breaks the silence. Michael wasn't planning to be that someone. He didn't walk into the event thinking, tonight I'll say what everyone else is afraid to say. But the weight of the whispers, the irritation in the producer's voice, the frustration in the actress's eyes, the audacity of the narrative being twisted to elevate someone not even present, all of it built the perfect emotional storm. And here's something crucial. Michael didn't roast Meghan because of personal history. He roasted her because of accumulated industry fatigue. Because people had been venting to him for years. Because he had watched people he respected get burned, used, or dismissed. Because he had seen too many talented people overshadowed by someone's need to dominate the story. Michael wasn't taking a shot. He was taking a stand. And the reason it hit so hard is simple. When you're known for silence, your words become explosions. When you never fire shots, your first bullet feels like a bomb. When you avoid drama, your smallest shade sounds like a scream. So when Michael inserted that line into his speech, a line that wasn't there an hour earlier, it carried the force of every frustration he had absorbed. And Hollywood felt it, because they recognized something in his tone that night. This wasn't malice. This wasn't vengeance. This wasn't pettiness. This was truth. Truth delivered by a man who only speaks when something genuinely needs to be said. And the audience knew instantly, who he was talking about. They didn't look around to figure it out. They didn't whisper names. They didn't need clarification. The moment the line left his mouth, the energy snapped like a rope pulled too tight. But the irony? That wasn't even the part that stunned the room. Before Michael said the word grifter, before he dropped the line that hit global headlines, he delivered a subtle, clever, razor-sharp twist, the kind of setup that only a seasoned performer could pull off. And that twist is what detonated the atmosphere. Because the speech wasn't supposed to begin the way it did. He changed it. Intentionally. Decisively. Right before stepping onto the stage. But what exactly did he say? And why did it catch the entire ballroom off guard? That's where we're heading next. Because Michael's speech didn't start with a roast. It started with a pivot. A pivot that sent a ripple through the crowd before the explosion even hit. And what came next would change everything. And absolutely no one saw it coming. Have you ever watched a moment unfold and felt, in real time, that something was off script, that a shift had happened so suddenly, so subtly, that it made your stomach tighten, without you fully understanding why? That's exactly what the ballroom experienced the second Michael B. Jordan stepped onto the stage. No one knew yet what was coming. No one predicted the emotional grenade he was about to drop. But something in his posture, his expression, his energy, signaled that the speech they expected was not the speech they were about to get. Let's start with the mini-hook, the spark that ignited the entire reveal. Michael took the stage, and he didn't smile. Not fully, not warmly, not in that polished, predictable Hollywood way that the cameras love. Instead, he gave a half grin, tight, knowing, almost mischievous, the kind of expression that screams, "I know something you don't." The audience noticed, not loudly, but instinctively. It's funny how a single micro-expression can shift the chemistry of a room. People who'd been chatting seconds earlier went still. People who'd been adjusting their chairs leaned forward. People who'd been holding wine glasses froze mid-sip. Even the camera operators snapped to attention, sensing that something unusually candid, and therefore unusually valuable, was about to unfold. But let's slow down and dissect the moment properly, because the shift wasn't random. It was intentional. Calculated. Directly connected to the backstage revelations we just explored. The ballroom dimmed. A spotlight settled on him. The applause swelled. It was the kind of applause that said, "We respect you. We admire you. We expect you to deliver a good, clean, polite speech." And that's exactly why what he did next hit with so much force. Because Michael B. Jordan didn't open with a thank you. He didn't open with humility. He didn't open with gratitude. He opened with a joke. A joke that wasn't in the script. A joke that wasn't in the teleprompter. A joke that, in hindsight, was the perfect setup for what was coming. He stepped to the microphone, adjusted it slightly, looked straight at the crowd, and said, "You ever have one of those nights where you're honored, and then hear someone else thinks they were supposed to be honored instead?" The room erupted, not into laughter, but into shock. You could feel it. A collective inhale. A momentary freeze. A wave of silent confusion that ran through the ballroom like electricity. Because that line, that wasn't generic humor. That wasn't a throwaway quip. That wasn't a joke crafted by event writers. That line was specific, pointed, sharp in a way that revealed far more truth than he explicitly said. And he delivered it with the timing of a seasoned performer. A half-beat pause before the punchline, a slight tilt of his head, the tiniest raise of an eyebrow that let everyone know he was fully aware of the weight behind his words. Let me ask you directly. How many people in that room instantly knew exactly who he meant? Almost everyone. Because the rumor had already circulated. The whisper backstage, the tension over the seating chart, the murmurs among VIP tables. People had heard variations of the story. They had caught snippets. They had been waiting, even without knowing they were waiting. And Michael had just confirmed the whisper in one line. But here's where the twist deepened. Most actors, when they drop a joke that lands awkwardly, follow it up with a warm laugh or a just kidding to soften the blow. Not Michael. Not tonight. He let the silence sit. He let the implications breathe. He let the weight of the line hang in the air like fog rolling across the ocean. He wanted the room to absorb it. This wasn't a slip. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't improvised recklessness. It was a choice that came directly from the cocktail of conversations he'd absorbed backstage. The disrespect, the audacity, the narrative twisting, the recurrent pattern, the idea that his accomplishment was somehow secondary or undeserved. It was all swirling in his mind. And that one line was the first emotional tremor. Now, here's the retention twist. The contradiction that made the moment even more explosive. People expected Michael to be polished, professional, predictable, safe. So the second he broke from the script, the room's emotional temperature skyrocketed. Guests shifted in their seats. Publicists whispered urgently. Some celebrities laughed nervously, their reactions delayed by 2 or 3 seconds as they processed what the line meant. Others covered their mouths.